Kinky Ink.
Hello, this is Shilly Naked Moon and I'm back again for another episode of Kinky Ink Erotic Stories, brought to you every week on YouTube. So if you enjoy this one, please do subscribe to my channel and I look forward to seeing you again every week. And this week I've got a very special story for you. So I'm back again rewriting the story of love and sex for the collective to bring cosmic bliss to all beings. So this week I'm Dana Scully from the Sex Files Sex Squad division of the FBI, and I've got a story for you called The Sex Files. So whether or not you are a fan of the X-Files or not, I really hope that you can enjoy this one. So it's sort of a fan fiction, sexy version of the X-Files. And yeah, I found it really fun to write, so I really hope you enjoy it too. So, thump. The thick steel grey file landed on Agent Mulder's desk, and he sat up to see Agent Scully standing directly opposite him. Her face wore a stern look, framed by her perfectly blow-dried red bob that looked like it would bounce if touched. Mulder, please tell me why you have taken on a case about owls. We aren't an animal rescue team. We are the FBI. We investigate crimes, and I'm not wasting our time interviewing a bunch of delusional people reporting sightings of giant owls. She crossed her arms across her chest, shifting her weight onto one of her navy blue heels. Mulder leaned back in his office chair, running a hand through his hair. He looked like he had been up all night. His face was unshaven and his shirt top button undone. Scully noticed that his tie was hanging off the armrest of his chair. Scully, there's been 2 people reported missing and 16 unusual sightings of owls in this one small town in the past month, Scully. I've read all of the reports and I believe there is something strange going on that the local sheriff just can't manage on his own. Mulder, please tell me why there is anything strange about owl sightings in Sonoma County. Something as simple as recreational drug use can account for the unusual details in the eyewitness accounts. One eyewitness, for example, describes owls with long fingers, and another eyewitness claims she saw an owl that was 5 feet tall. This is a classic example of a hallucination experience derived from taking LSD. Mulder stood up stoically and walked over to the projector screen, pressing a button on the remote. Scully squinted her cool blue eyes against the glare. She perched on the edge of Mulder's desk, smoothing the edges of her charcoal trouser suit and crossing her round-toed heels that were stretched out in front of her. A large black and white image flashed onto the display. It was a hand-drawn sketch illustrating a large owl-like being with eerie glowing eyes and what appeared to be legs and shoes. Mulder launched into his spiel about the image. This eyewitness sketch illustrates the classic description of the unusual owl sightings that have been occurring around the small town of Triple Nipple. The small town has a population of just over 2,000 and is situated at the foot of a small mountain range. Mulder remained focused on the screen as he spoke, and the projector whirred as he clicked the button to bring up the next shot. The next image was a close-up of the inside of a wrist, marked by a series of intricate white lines that formed a geometric pattern. The skin on the wrist appeared irritated, and a circular red patch had formed around the marks. Mulder turned to face Scully, who had put on her thin rim round frame glasses to examine the images more closely. He continued, a 24-year-old named Lily woke up to find these tattoo-like markings on her wrist on the morning of 19th of April, just 5 days ago. She also described having seen an owl-like being standing by her bedside when she woke briefly during the night. Scully rolled her eyes cynically. Please don't tell me you think this has something to do with aliens, she murmured under her breath. Acting as if he hadn't heard her, Mulder clicked the button and the next image flickered onto life on the screen. A photo of a crop circle popped up, bearing recognisable similarities to the pattern of markings on the wrist in the previous photo. This was discovered on the morning of 19th of April by a farmer in the county of Wiltshire, England. I'm not saying it's aliens, Scully, but how can this be a coincidence? Oh dear. Scully raised an eyebrow dubiously, yet her lips remained pursed. A tiny square object was the subject of the next photo. It appeared to be made of a metallic substance, and as Mulder enhanced the size, Scully could make out what appeared to be a computer chip. This was removed from under the surface of her skin on 20th of April. It's some kind of microchip device yet to be identified. Lily says she has no recollection of how it could have been placed there. Scully balks. Mulder, I can't believe you are connecting these incredulous pieces of information. How did she even remove this object without surgery? Mulder rested both hands on the desk, the fatigue under his eyes showing. Her friend cut it out with a penknife. It was buried just beneath the skin's surface. She said she could feel the implant through the skin. Upon hearing this, Scully stood up briskly, straightening her double-breasted jacket before storming off towards the door. She paused in the doorframe for a moment, her wide shoulder pads tapering down to her petite waist. Mulder lowered the remote. Hey, Scully. Mulder, I'm going to talk to Director Skinner. We are not wasting any more precious X-Files resources under the pretense of a bunch of bird-watching enthusiasts who probably got off their tits on LSD and got a tattoo under the influence. She turned to go. Her usually pale complexion flushed. Scully, wait. I have the microchip here. Mulder held out a small plastic evidence bag. I have found someone qualified and willing to take a look at it. We can go over to the lab right now and check the hard evidence, he implored her. She leaned against the door frame, the edge of her chin tilted to the ceiling as she exhaled. Her angular features still beautifully lit by the dim light spilling into the office through the bland cream blinds. She revolved in the doorway, strolling reluctantly back over to Mulder. She looked at him coldly, while snatching the evidence bag from him. This better be good, Mulder. Agent Skinner brought me in to watch over you, and I'm not letting him down again. Mulder grinned. Let's go to the lab and meet Dr. Fauci. He placed his hand on her shoulder as they walked towards the door together. Oh, I can hear my cat meowing. Less than an hour later, they pulled into the lab research faculty parking lot in the bureau's Ford that Mulder was driving. They strolled through the front sliding doors of the concrete block building, and reaching the front desk, they were escorted by the receptionist to the 4th floor. It's just down the hall, last door on the right, she called after them before disappearing back into the lift. They reached the door that had a frosted glass window above a placard titled Immunology Research. Scully shrugged at Mulder, perplexed. I'm telling you, Scully, he's our guy, Mulder declared confidently, pushing open the door and walking into a room full of lab tables and science equipment. Ah, Agent Mulder and Agent Scully, delighted to meet you. Dr. Fauci stepped out from behind some apparatus to shake their hands. He was shorter than average, with a dark brown crop of hair and beady eyes blinking at them from behind his pair of glasses. He seemed eager to take a look at the evidence. "Bring the sample over here and we'll take a look at it," he said, ushering them behind a microscope on a high desk. "You know, this could really be something quite exciting, if it is what you think it is, Agent Mulder. It was lucky that I heard you had this technology in your possession. It could provide some answers for both of us, I do believe." He peered into the microscope whilst Mulder leaned his elbows on the desk, impatient to hear Fauci's impression. "Oh my," Fauci muttered as he peered into the viewfinder. Mulder's tie flopped onto Fauci's shoulder as he struggled to glimpse a peek at what Fauci was seeing. He jolted back upright, narrowly missing a collision with Fauci, who spun around to address them. "Well, I can tell you that this is a piece of advanced technology that was not created by any research lab that I am aware of." Scully glanced from Dr. Fauci to Mulder. "What are you saying? You don't know what this is?" she said. "Oh no, I can confirm that this is a microchip implant, possibly constituting evidence of extraterrestrial technology. But I will need to run further tests to determine its exact function." Scully saw Fauci fumble as he hurriedly returned the microchip into the evidence bag before slipping it into his pocket. He led them to the door. "I'll be in touch with you by the latest tomorrow afternoon to let you know what I find. I want to thank you again for the honour of allowing me to assist you with your investigations. I do believe that I may be able to offer some valuable assistance." The agents nodded as they left the doctor, who seemed keen to continue his analysis of the microchip. As they entered the elevator, Scully whispered tersely in Mulder's ear, "I'm not sure what immunology has to do with microchips and extraterrestrial technology, Mulder. It would be great if you could enlighten me with your theories about what the hell is going on here." Mulder, who had been deep in thought about the case, detected a waft of Scully's perfume as she brushed past him to press the ground floor button. "Mulder?" Scully flinched as Mulder sniffed at the air near her shirt collar. "What's that perfume, Scully? You smell good today." Scully's face exposed her frustration as she sucked air through tight lips, slowly turning to face Mulder. "Mulder, it's what I wear every day. I need you to tell me what's going on if we're going to continue working together as partners. I can't help you if you don't explain." Scully trailed off as she could no longer ignore that Mulder's eye gaze seemed to be focused on her lips with a dreamy look in his eyes. She tried to collect her thoughts but felt unusually distracted. Just then, a cell phone went off in Mulder's pocket. Scully faced the elevator doors, tucking her hair behind her ears as Mulder whipped the phone out of his pocket. Seconds later, he pushed the aerial back into the cell phone and shoved it into his pocket. "Scully, they have found a body. It's one of the missing people. I need you to come with me to take a look at the body now." A few hours later, they reached the crime scene, a wooded area on the edge of a small lake. They flashed their badges at the local copper, who lifted the red tape for them to enter. Scully followed Mulder as he ducked under to enter the cornered-off area where the body lay. The air was thick with mist and a heavy atmosphere hung between the trees. The agents wore long, thick black coats. Scully pulled on her white surgical gloves and squatted down on her heels. She spoke into her voice recorder. "Young Caucasian male, aged 21 years, deceased. Name Charlie Montford. Found lying face down. No obvious signs of a struggle." She edged closer, brushing her hair at the nape of his neck to the side. Similar markings to previous case on back of neck. Discoloration of skin forming a geometric pattern. Scully lowered the recorder. Mulder, take a look at this. He has the same tattoo as Lily, but on his neck. Mulder, who had been talking to someone in the crowd, rolled up his sleeves as he strolled back over. Frankly, Mulder, I think what we're looking at here is a group of young people in some sort of cult. They could be using white ink tattoos to indicate their affiliation. They took some drugs, got scared by a few hallucinations about owls, then something went wrong. They probably tried to cover up some illicit behaviour by hiding this guy in the woods to make it look like he just went missing. Mulder was regarding the body while stroking the stubble under his chin, seemingly unconvinced. He hitched up his trousers at the waist, bending down to Scully's level. Scully, I've just talked to a friend of Charlie's mum. Her son is a friend of Charlie's. She said that both of the young men have been having strange dreams about giant owls visiting their bedrooms at night. She said Charlie had been acting rather paranoid lately and was talking about an owl goddess that lived in the woods. What are you getting at, Mulder? Scully snapped. I know you don't want to hear this, Scully, but owls are a regular feature in alien abduction cases. Abductees often report seeing owls with disproportionately large black eyes, sometimes acting out of character for their species. Some stories report giant owls with human features. It is possible that the human psyche uses the memory of an owl to cover the true memory of seeing an alien as a natural defence mechanism. Or the memory is an implant placed there by the Greys to wipe the memory of the traumatic experiments performed on the abductee. Scully stood up suddenly, her face heated. She peeled off her gloves, dumping them into the allocated waste bag. Mulder, I need to examine the body thoroughly in order to determine the cause of death before we jump to any of your baseless conclusions. Mulder propped his hands on his hips. I like it when you get feisty, Scully. Did you know that? Scully managed a feigned smile and nodded somewhat insipidly. Just then, it started to drizzle with rain. Mulder, taking off his coat, held it out over Scully's shoulders, and they walked back to the car together. Let's get something to eat while they transport the body back to the lab, Mulder said, opening the passenger door for Scully. It's not like you to prioritise food over casework, Scully teased, her blue eyes softening. She knew Mulder was obsessed with solving this case, and she wanted to help him, even if he drove her crazy with unfounded speculations about extraterrestrial encounters. Mulder swivelled in the driver's seat, wrapping his arm around the back of her seat. We can talk over the case details over lunch. How's that for an idea, Scully? His warm brown eyes sparkled at her, and she forced a laugh, turning to face out of the window again. Scully felt his hand on her shoulder, and her body tensed. Mulder spoke gently. Listen, Scully, I couldn't do this without you. You know that, don't you? She relaxed slightly, her body turning back towards him, and she blushed as she met his gaze. You are the most intelligent agent in our department, and you keep me grounded, not to mention alive, he said. I don't know how I can be the most intelligent agent in our department, Mulder, she said. Well, in the bedroom department then, he replied. I'll have you reported for inappropriate comments, Scully retorted playfully. Mulder turned the key in the engine. You could get reassigned to the sex squad department. I hear they are looking for hot redheads, Scully. Scully attempted to conceal her smile. Come on, Mulder. We need to get to the lab to examine the body. Mulder was not dissuaded by her apparent contempt of his advances. So he continued. I've got a body you can examine, Scully, as rigorously as you like. Without any hesitation, Scully whacked Mulder one and jumped out of the car. Mulder watched bemused as she stalked around the front of the bonnet and pulled open the driver's door. He looked at her expectantly. "Get out, I'm driving," she said, and he obeyed without saying another word, then spent the rest of the drive envisioning Scully's outfit as a potential member of the FBI Sex Squad division. So, later that afternoon, Scully was just removing her white lab coat after finishing off examining the body, when Mulder called Dr. Fauci for any news on the test results of the microchip. His face became gloomy by the end of the call. "This isn't good." He seemed disheartened as he recounted his conversation with Dr. Fauci to Scully. Apparently, he identified the microchip to be a regular computer chip, and then it was accidentally destroyed during one of the tests, Scully. "Well, accidents do occur, Mulder. Do you trust this Dr. Fauci?" she inquired, her face taut with tiredness. "Damn it, Scully." Mulder kicked the operating table. "I shouldn't have given him the evidence. He might be working for someone else. I feel like we've hit a dead end in this case." "Well, Mulder, I've still got to run some tests on the bloods from the body to determine whether it could have been a drug overdose. I did find signs of hypoglycemia and cerebral edema, but we'll know as soon as the results come back from the lab. We may even be able to rule out foul play, as the visions of owls may indicate that Charlie was experiencing some symptoms of psychosis in the form of hallucinations of this owl goddess. He could have wandered off into the woods and taken an overdose with suicidal intent." Scully looked over at Mulder with concern, who was now gripping the edge of the operating table with his fingertips and staring at his shoes. Just then, Mulder's phone bleeped. He jerked upright instantly to answer the call. Seconds later, he was already moving towards the door. "Scully, they found the other missing person. She's alive." They hurried out of the lab, the doors swinging behind them. The car sped out of the parking lot, its tyres screeching as Mulder accelerated over the corner of the curb, the wheels skidding onto the tarmac. It took just under an hour for Mulder to drive them into a wooded area called Elysian Fields, where the young woman had allegedly shown up in a confused state. The sun was setting, and the forest on either side of the road loomed over them as shadows crept across the horizon. As they turned onto the dirt track leading to Elysian Fields Wood, the moon was already gleaming over the treetops, casting a silver spell over the tall, thin birch trees. Scully thought to herself that the trees somehow seemed lonely, the way that each trunk stood separate from the next. As the car bumped along, they could make out a group of figures gathered at the end of the track. As they pulled up in the vehicle, the car's headlights cast its illumination over a young woman who was sitting down and overshadowed by a man in uniform, whom Mulder recognised to be the sheriff. The pair jumped out of the vehicle and hastily rushed over to the young woman, who they found to be mumbling incoherently to herself. The sheriff pulled them aside to address them privately. "She keeps talking about some place called Bohemian Grove, something about how the Owl Queen came and took her." His patience was clearly strained, and he raised both hands, gesturing for them to take over, questioning the witness. Mulder bent forwards to the young woman, who was plainly in a state of distress. He spoke calmly. "Sarah, I'm Agent Mulder from the FBI, and this is Agent Scully. We are here to ask you a few questions. Do you know why you are here?" Scully noticed that the young woman's hands were trembling, and so she took off her coat to cover the girl's bare arms. The young woman still showed no indication that she'd registered the presence of the agents. "Sarah, can you hear me?" Scully stooped to eye level to connect with the young woman, but the girl only continued shaking. Her hair was dishevelled and had fallen into her face. She remained quiet. Scully came to her feet and whispered to Mulder, "She's in shock. I think the questions will have to wait, Mulder." Then they heard a barely audible noise from the girl that started off fairly quietly at first. "Hoo," then a little more loudly, "Twoo." It resembled the call of an owl. Scully made a puzzled face at Mulder, who seemed to be deep in contemplation. The girl then started to speak in a jumbled manner. "Flying. She came on wings from above, flying." Mulder listened, stroking his stubbled chin, as if piecing together the evidence. Scully looked at him fervently, about to suggest that they drive the girl to the station right away. Then, without warning, a blinding bright light exploded out of the sky above them, illuminating everything with its brilliance. The figures on the ground raised their hands in front of their faces, all except the young woman, who just smiled to herself, knowingly. There was a timeless and deafening silence that passed, until Scully vaguely became aware that she was lying down in a vast white space. The room had almost no features. It was a circular dome of minimalist style, and as Scully's eyes searched for a doorframe, she discovered that there was no furniture or visible source of light. Yet the room glowed with an incandescent light, as if they were inside a hollow moon. When she moved across the floor, it took minimal effort, as if there was no gravity. She felt as if she was gliding on air. Ahead of her, she saw Mulder slumped against the wall, his shirt ripped open, exposing his chest. "Mulder!" she exclaimed, reaching out to grasp his hand in hers and touching his face tenderly with her fingertips. He stirred, opening his eyes with that dreamy look again. He looked at Scully for a moment, then smiled, closing his eyes again, his chin rolling to one side. "Mulder, talk to me. Are you okay?" "Scully, look at what you're wearing." The colour drained from Scully's face as she glanced down, shocked to see that she wore a floor-length robe of silk. She ran her fingers over the cream silk, discovering, to her dismay, that her underwear had been removed. Mulder opened his eyes again, gazing up at her with a look of innocence touching his handsome face. "You look like an angel." He mouthed the words, his eyes pouring with adoration and wonder. He extended his hand to her shoulder, and then, using his fingers, he gingerly traced the edge of her shoulder blade. Scully was horrified when his touch revealed to her that her shoulder blades had morphed into a new bone structure, forming a pair of wings. Mulder's hand reached out to stroke her new wings that grew from the delicate skin on her back and extended over her shoulders in an arc of tawny white feathers. "Scully, I don't want to hold you back from solving this case, but I think we found out who the owl goddess is," he said. Scully felt something like terror and excitement mingle inside of her. Nothing made sense right now, but her body felt alive, and her usual aloof edge dissolved into an attraction, a sort of attraction towards Mulder. "Where are we, Mulder?" she asked tentatively. He placed her hand over his heart, and she felt his heartbeat as he breathed deeply, imploring her to come closer with his puppy dog eyes. "I believe we are inside the hollow moon, And we are being watched. His eyes motioned to the far wall, and she turned to see a small two-way mirror. Do you think Director Skinner would understand when I tell him that I made love to the owl goddess inside the hollow moon in an effort to solve the mystery of Bohemian Grove? Scully laughed and nuzzled her face into Mulder's chest. Well, it's worth a try, Mulder. She hovered over him nervously, and then his hands clasped her waist firmly, pulling her closer. A strand of auburn hair fell across her face, and Mulder brushed it aside. The truth is out there, Scully, he said. She looked at him long and deep. Her clear blue eyes made him drawn to kiss her right then, but something made him wait. No, Mulder, the truth is in here. Scully unrobed herself in one swoop. Her robe dropped to the floor, revealing her pale luminescent nakedness. Her red hair flamed atop of her magnificent snowy wings. Mulder glanced down to see for the first time her seamless curves and the strawberry blonde tussock of hair that crested the meeting of her thighs. He grinned, and then they kissed. It was a simple kiss that said everything, really. The kiss of friendship, partnership, and of people who had seen and escaped death. It was also the kiss of an owl, and Mulder found himself bewitched by it. An obsessive desire possessed him, and he threw her to the floor, ripping his shirt off. He didn't care if aliens, or the military even, were watching through that peephole, because seeing Scully out of her work attire had turned him on in a way that surprised even himself. He caressed her small waist and kissed every crevice of her body sweetly. She languidly stretched her body beneath him, lapping up his every move, and when she could bear it no longer, she unzipped him, slipping him into her mouth. He moved against her succulent peachy lips, ecstasy written in the lines on his face. She flicked her tongue at unexpected intervals, and the thought of him being inside her brought him to an absolute frenzy, until he fell backwards onto the floor, his eyes rolling. She pulled off his trousers, and her hands roamed from his ankles to his chest, paying special attention to his hard cock that she pressed against her soft breasts, massaging herself while squeezing him in her cleavage. His eyes bulged, and he raised his head as if to say something before dissolving back into the floor. Scully. His voice was husky and his breath heavy. She kneaded his chest with her breasts whilst kissing him passionately along the curve of his shoulder, climbing his neck all the way to his earlobe. It's just, I'm trying to work out the mystery of Elysian Fields. In Greek mythology, it was the idyllic underworld of the gods, a meadow of bliss. And this owl goddess of Bohemian Grove, the secret society. Mulder's eyes were glazed over, as if seeing something Scully couldn't. Scully raised one eyebrow, glancing up at him crossly. Mulder, can you just for one moment forget your mythology and theorising? Could it be that I am the answer to the mysteries you seek? If you enter me, I believe you shall find a kind of heaven that satiates your thirst for answers. Mulder looked astonished at these words. I thought you were the scientific one, he teased. Something in Scully had snapped. Her mind could no longer rationalise and explain. It was as if something took control of her, and Mulder, sensing her surrender, flipped her over on her back, exposing her neck to his yearning lips. He touched her between the legs, quite gently at first. Then she writhed and moaned, summoning him to enter her. He penetrated her, and her wings enfolded him, sweeping them into elation together. For some time, Scully's mind dissolved into an abyss, and she was conscious of nothing but the overwhelming pleasure that vibrated in every cell of her body. Scully felt her body shudder against Mulder's warm chest. Sweat droplets formed on his furrowed brow as his chiselled jaw ground in mind-bending ecstasy. Together they climaxed, Scully's face only a shade less crimson than her hair as her wings stretched out, the feathers a-quiver. Then they fell against each other onto the floor, their skin moist and radiant. Scully, I think they are watching us. Mulder was watching the viewing window in the wall. I saw something move behind the glass. He got up, dressing in a hurry. I want to find out who is behind this absurd experimentation on humans. But before Mulder could put his other leg into his trousers, a blinding light filled the room, and the scene evaporated before them. The next morning, they were both back on duty, reporting to headquarters. They waited in tense silence in front of Agent Director Skinner's desk as he read the case report in full. After an awkward pause, he placed the case file back on the desk sullenly, taking off his reading glasses slowly and interlocking his fingers in his lap. And you think that this is a good use of Bureau funds, I suppose? His eyes bored holes into both of them. How do you expect me to feed this back to the board? Secret cults? Alien experiments involving hybrid human owls? Do you want them to close down the X-Files? He exhaled in exasperation. Sir, Scully began, shifting on her feet uncomfortably. He butted in. I entrusted you to keep an eye on Mulder, Scully, and you let me down. You are both suspended until further notice. The agents glanced sideways at each other, but said nothing. Then they reluctantly removed their badges and guns before shuffling out of the office. They never did solve the case of the Owl Queen of Bohemian Grove. And, not surprisingly, Scully had no trouble in finding a logical explanation for the entire experience. However, the pair of them were both secretly convinced that what had occurred was a true taste of the paradise beyond the veil, an underworld known by some as Elysian Fields. The end. So that's it for this episode of Kinky Ink Erotic Stories. I really hope you enjoyed the Sex Files this week. And just to let you know that if you did, I have published a book called Agent Owl Meeting the Shadow, which is available on Amazon as paperback, Kindle and audiobook. So I'll pop the link in the description for you, and please subscribe to this channel if you enjoy my stories, and I really appreciate your support. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Good night.
Ah, kinky ink.